The people in these stories were just living their normal lives, until the night they realized someone was already inside. I've been a long-haul truck driver for 12 years, and the stretch of Route 50 in Nevada, nicknamed the loneliest road in America, still makes me uneasy. I've driven it dozens of times, but the events of one night in late October 2019 changed the way I see it forever. It was close to midnight, and I was about halfway through my route. The desert was pitch black except for the narrow beam of my headlights cutting through the emptiness. No cell service, no towns for miles, just the faint outline of mountains under a moonless sky. I remember feeling unusually tired, so I rolled the window down, letting in the cold desert air to keep myself awake. About 20 minutes later, I saw something in the distance, a faint red glow low to the ground, maybe a mile ahead. I slowed down, thinking it might be a car pulled over with its hazard lights on. As I got closer, the glow didn't blink like hazard lights should. It just pulsed slowly, like it was breathing. When I finally approached, I realized it wasn't coming from a vehicle at all. The source was sitting in the middle of the right lane, a metal sphere about the size of a basketball, emitting a dim red light. I slowed to a crawl, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder as I passed. It gave me the creeps, but I told myself it was probably some kind of equipment that had fallen off a truck. That's when I noticed the figure. About 30 yards past the sphere, on the opposite side of the road, a tall man stood perfectly still. No flashlight, no reflective gear, just standing there, facing my truck as I passed. His head turned to follow me, but he didn't move otherwise. I could only see him for a few seconds before he disappeared into my side mirror. I pressed the accelerator harder than I meant to, my pulse racing. A mile later, my CB radio crackled with static, even though I hadn't touched it. Then, a man's voice came through, low and distorted. "You shouldn't be here." The voice vanished, replaced by dead air. I drove for another hour without seeing a single vehicle. When I finally reached a small truck stop, I jumped out to check my trailer. Everything was fine, except when I turned back toward the cab, I noticed something on the passenger side door, a perfect red handprint, as if someone had pressed their palm against the metal. The handprint was warm to the touch, even in the freezing night air. I left it there until I reached my destination, but when I tried to show a coworker the next morning, it was gone. No smudge, no mark, nothing. I still drive that route occasionally, but I've never seen the sphere, the man, or heard that voice again. Still, I roll my windows up the moment I get onto Route 50 after dark. It was the middle of January, the kind of night when the snow outside swallows every sound. I was house sitting for my aunt while she was away on vacation. She lived in an old farmhouse miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by woods so dense you could barely see 10 feet in. That night, I was curled up on the couch under a blanket, reading, with only one dim lamp on. The house creaked occasionally, but that was normal. It was over 100 years old. At around 11:30 p.m. the power flickered once, then went out completely. The sudden silence was deafening. I grabbed my phone for light and headed to the kitchen to find some candles. That's when I heard it, faint crunching sounds coming from outside, like someone slowly stepping through the snow. At first, I thought maybe it was just an animal, but the footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. I froze, listening. They stopped. Then, a few seconds later, they started again, this time closer to the kitchen window. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whoever, or whatever, was out there could hear it. I crept toward the window, careful not to make noise. I peeked through a gap in the curtain and nearly dropped my phone. About 20 feet away, at the edge of the tree line, stood a tall figure, completely still, watching the house. It was hard to make out details in the dark, but I could see the outline of a hood over their head. They didn't move for what felt like minutes. Then they took one slow step toward the house, then another. I backed away from the window and locked the kitchen door. The only weapon I could think to grab was the heavy fireplace poker. The footsteps crunched closer until they sounded like they were just outside the wall. Suddenly, something tapped on the kitchen window. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't look. I didn't want to. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher what was happening. She told me to stay on the line until officers arrived. I crouched behind the couch, listening to the wind pick up. Then, nothing. No footsteps, no knocking. It was like the person had vanished into thin air. About 15 minutes later, I saw headlights cutting through the trees. 2 deputies searched the property, but found no footprints, no sign of anyone having been there. When they left, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but in the morning, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the snow outside the kitchen window, written in messy, uneven letters, were the words, "Come out and play." When I was in my early 20s, I worked the night shift at a small roadside motel. It wasn't busy, maybe 3 or 4 guests a night, and most of my job was just sitting at the front desk until morning. The motel was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by forest. During winter, the fog would roll in thick enough to make the parking lot disappear from view. I usually didn't mind the quiet nights, until one particular shift. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed him. I was behind the desk, scrolling through my phone, when movement outside caught my eye. Through the glass doors, I saw a man standing at the far end of the parking lot. He wasn't moving, just standing there, half shrouded in fog, facing the motel. I waited, thinking maybe he was a guest looking for the office, but he didn't come closer. After a minute or two, I got up and unlocked the front door to call out to him. The cold hit me instantly, and the only sound was the faint hum of the neon vacancy sign. "Can I help you?" I called. The man didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then he turned and walked toward the tree line, disappearing into the fog. Weird, but I told myself he was probably just lost. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to focus on my work. About 20 minutes later, I heard something strange. A faint tapping sound coming from down the hallway where the guest rooms were. I grabbed the master key and walked down the hall. The motel only had 10 rooms, and most were empty that night. The tapping grew louder as I passed room 6, an unoccupied room with the door firmly locked. I stood there listening. It was coming from the inside. Chills ran down my spine. I unlocked the door slowly, half expecting to find an animal trapped inside. But the room was empty, completely still. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. Then I noticed the window was unlocked. I knew for a fact I had locked all the windows earlier in the night, as part of my routine. When I went to close it, I saw something in the snow just outside. 2 sets of footprints. One set leading up to the window, and another set leading away, back toward the forest. I locked the window, shut the curtains, and told myself it was over. But at around 4 a.m., I saw him again. The same man, standing in the parking lot, closer this time, just a few yards from the glass doors. His hood was down now, and I could see his face. Pale, expressionless, with eyes that didn't seem to blink. I picked up the phone to call the police, but when I looked back, he was gone. They never found anyone when they came. No footprints in the parking lot. No sign of forced entry in room 6. For weeks after that, I worked my shifts with the doors locked, refusing to go outside after dark. But the worst part came 2 months later, when a guest checked out and left behind a disposable camera. I was curious, so I had the photos developed. Most were normal vacation pictures, but the last one made me feel sick. It was a photo of me, sitting at the front desk, taken from outside the glass doors. If you made it this far, maybe you belong here. Subscribe to Whisper Cage, more true horror is waiting.